At 5:12 in the morning, Washington, D.C., the house of a cabinet member was the scene of devastation. 20 kilos of heroin and $40 million in cash were discovered. Alongside a murder meant to silence the Secretary of the Navy, who had vanished into the night. Something far more sinister was concealed within those walls. And this is the moment America woke up. Let me demonstrate. Because the level of corrupt activities we later uncovered revealed they were engaging in truly heinous acts. Thinking he was a dreadful person who committed terrible deeds. At 5:12 a.m., rain clung to the Washington pavement while the neighborhood slumbered. Then headlights emerged, quiet and purposeful, as an unmarked SUV slid to a halt before the home of the Secretary of the Navy. Agents moved with speed and focus. There was no knock, no warning. A steel battering ram struck the entrance, one blow, two, and on the third impact, the oak door gave way, wood splintering across the foyer. FBI and DEA agents flooded inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every room was searched, drawers torn open, but behind the serene furniture and family photographs, there was no peace. Agents discovered 20 kilograms of heroin stacked in plastic wrap and $40 million in cash sealed within black duffel bags. In a locked cabinet lay shipping documents bearing cartel codes. But the most shocking revelation was the emptiness. Secretary of the Navy Jackson Reed was gone. No note, no phone, no trace, only a powerful man who had disappeared into the night. If you want the full truth behind the events in Washington, hit like so this story reaches more people. The investigation didn't start with drugs or money. It began 6 months earlier with a missing woman. Sophia Hayes, 27. Bright, ambitious, and suddenly gone. Her friends reported her missing after she ceased responding to messages. Initially, it appeared to be a simple missing person case. Detectives reviewed security footage from restaurants and luxury hotels in Washington, and again. The same pattern emerged. Sophia was never alone. She was always with Secretary of the Navy Jackson Reed. They walked side by side, dined together, and entered elevators together. Text messages recovered from Sophia's phone showed she was worried and had news to share with someone close. Before her phone went silent, 2 days after the report, a body was discovered in an empty lot at the city's edge. Sophia Hayes, 2 months pregnant. The body of 27-year-old Sophia Hayes, missing for 6 months, was found this morning on an empty lot on the eastern edge of Washington. There were no signs of robbery. Nothing was missing except time. The conclusion was brutal and direct. Someone wanted her silenced. A missing woman had become a homicide, and every trail pointed to the same powerful man who had now vanished. Sophia Hayes was alive, hopeful, and 2 months pregnant before someone decided silence was safer than her voice. If you believe she deserved justice, type "Justice for Sophia," and the chase begins. The shock at federal headquarters was instantaneous. A missing official was serious. A dead woman was worse. But a Secretary of the Navy disappearing after a drug raid was beyond anything they had witnessed. No one could pretend anymore. A man with access to military routes and port schedules had vanished. Every agency went on alert. Teams spreading across Washington, Maryland, and Virginia to airports, ports, hotels, and private marina docks. The order was brief and cold: find Jackson Reed. What investigators uncovered next explained everything. For 5 years, Reed had been living a double life. Behind the polished speeches and ribbon cuttings, he was quietly managing maritime routes for CJNG, using his rank to move cargo unnoticed. His network was constructed from men with nothing to lose, illegal entrants, escaped convicts, and violent offenders who owed him loyalty. They handled packages at night and smiled in daylight. Nothing about them suggested a cartel. Which was the point? Reed had used his authority to open doors others could not. Customs checks vanished. Inspectors were reassigned, and records were erased. The ocean became an invisible highway. When agents seized his home, they found maps of ports from Mexico to Texas marked with red circles. Houston stood out. It was the only location with a handwritten note, "Last option." Within hours, surveillance teams picked up movement, credit cards used near the coast, a rental vehicle heading south. Cameras along the interstate captured a single figure, alone, driving fast. The face was blurry, but the posture was unmistakable. Reed was running. The chase moved to the water, Coast Guard cutters, border patrol boats, and a helicopter overhead. In the night, the Gulf looked empty, only black waves and salt wind. But through night vision, there was motion, a speedboat slicing across the darkness. Engines roared, the stillness shattered, and warning shots were fired. The boat swerved, waves crashing over the bow. As voices shouted through loudspeakers, "Stop the engine!" Hands visible. The man at the wheel didn't stop, he pushed forward. Desperate eyes fixed on the open horizon. He knew what awaited on shore: prison, headlines, disgrace. The water was his only hope. Then the boat jerked, a line had caught the propeller, and the engine died. Agents boarded in seconds, finding him slumped on the deck, breathing hard, drenched in salt water. There was no struggle now. He raised his hand slowly, defeated by the very ocean he once commanded. Jackson Reed was in handcuffs. A high-ranking official once untouchable, now a fugitive caught in the dark. The radios confirmed it. A single message echoed across Washington: "Subject in custody." But as the agents later discovered, Reed was only the beginning. The capture of Jackson Reed did not end the investigation, in many ways. It was only the opening move. As soon as he was secured on the deck of the patrol boat, FBI analysts began tearing into every device taken from his home: computers, encrypted drives, burned phones, handwritten notes. What they found was not a trail, it was a map. Reed's life had been split in two. On the surface, he was a respected leader, a man trusted with fleets and strategy. Beneath it, he had built a criminal network that stretched across 3 states. And that network was still alive, still moving, still dangerous. At 2:14 a.m., a command center in Washington lit up with red markers as new teams were formed. Names appeared on screens, addresses, warehouses, storage units rented under fake identities. Small offices that looked normal from the street but inside carried a different reality: stacks of documents, satellite phones, coordinated shipment schedules. The order came down: hit 'em all. No delays. Before sunrise, Washington, Maryland, and Virginia saw a coordinated operation unlike anything the region had experienced in years. Convoys rolled through empty streets, federal agents moving with speed and purpose. Every location had to be secured simultaneously. If even one suspect escaped, the entire structure could scatter. The first strike hit a commercial building disguised as a logistics company, from outside. It looked abandoned: metal shutters, faded sign, no activity. But as the door was breached, the truth emerged. Inside were racks of boxes labeled with shipping numbers. Most contained paper, some contained bricks wrapped in black plastic identical to the packages found in Reed's home. Several men were arrested without a fight. They knew the game was over. The second location was harder: a suburban house with a perfect yard, children's toys outside, a bright porch light. The neighbors thought it belonged to a family. Instead, the basement held computer servers and surveillance screens. When agents entered, 2 men ran toward a hidden exit. They didn't make it far. Both caught in the backyard, breathless, hands up. More raids followed: a locked warehouse near the interstate, a self-storage facility, a lakeside cabin used for meetings at night. Each location added another piece to the puzzle. What shocked investigators most were the faces. Some suspects were predictable: hardened men with criminal records, scars, anger in their eyes. But others were different: men in suits, employees with government badges, people who had passed background checks and walked among others unnoticed. They had all worked for Reed. They had trusted him. They had followed orders. And now, one by one, they were in handcuffs. By noon, dozens of arrests had been made. Trucks were seized, documents scanned, money counted. But even as agents secured the evidence, a single question hung over the operation: how far had this network reached? The answer would come soon, and it would be worse than anyone expected. By midday, the situation had transformed from a criminal investigation into a national security crisis. The arrest of a Secretary of the Navy who had been running covert drug routes was not just shocking, it revealed a structure that was more complex than anyone expected. Jackson Reed had not acted alone. He had built a system that did not depend on violence at street level but on access, authority, and paperwork. The deeper investigators went, the more they understood how far his influence reached inside government walls. Reed's life had existed in 2 parallel worlds without ever colliding. In one world, he wore medals, attended ceremonies, delivered speeches, and shook hands with military leaders. In the other, he controlled men who had nothing to lose, smugglers from foreign ports, fugitives who had escaped prison, and violent operators trained to follow orders. What shocked investigators was not just the type of people he commanded, but the fact that many others working for him were not criminals at all. They were fully employed, educated, and trusted individuals inside federal offices. They held jobs at customs checkpoints, procurement desks, shipping inspections, and port administration. They passed security clearances. They had government ID badges, office keys, and family photos on the desks. During the day, they behaved like ordinary employees. But late at night, their phones would light up with instructions from a different world. The network itself was built on something more subtle and far more dangerous than guns: the invisible power of paperwork. Everything illegal had been disguised inside legal processes. Drugs did not move through back roads or hidden tunnels. They moved through official containers stamped by official hands, protected by official schedules. Customs forms were filed correctly. Permits looked valid. Port access records were signed by the right names. If any inspector opened a file, the details appeared routine. There was no need to break locks or bribe guards when the system could be used from the inside. A single signature could replace a truck full of armed escorts. For years, shipments had passed through American waters behind a facade of legitimacy, entering ports at night and exiting in daylight. By the time anyone asked questions, they were already gone. After the raids, a joint command center was activated. Large screens displayed maps of Washington, Maryland, Virginia, and the Gulf Coast. Red lines connected ports, warehouses, storage units, and residential addresses. Every line pointed back to Reed. His control had reached deeper than simple influence. He had created a spiderweb that linked multiple offices across the region. Commanders who reviewed the evidence were stunned by the scope. This had not been the corruption of one office but a network of offices tied together by loyalty, trust, and fear. What made the situation even more unsettling was that some employees insisted they had no idea what was happening. They believed they were handling confidential national security matters. Others refused to speak at all, while a few tried to flee, attempting to catch flights or cross borders before their names surfaced in the system. None got far. The most disturbing discovery came from encrypted group chats found on a seized phone. There were no names, only initials and coded nicknames. But the conversations were clear. They discussed drop points, time windows, port movements, and the status of inspections. They celebrated when shipments cleared customs and warned each other when police patrols were near. These were not reckless criminals. They were professionals who operated with efficiency and confidence. In one message, a man asked why they were risking so much. The reply was immediate: Reed takes care of us. Nobody touches us. We're under his wings. It was loyalty, not to the nation, but to the man who protected them. Photographs from past events provided another unsettling layer. At least 8 of the people arrested had been standing beside Reed at official ceremonies over the years. They had appeared in public wearing formal clothes, smiling for the camera. They looked like honorable citizens serving their country. In reality, they were safeguarding illegal cargo, altering patrol schedules, and ensuring that certain containers were never opened. For a long time, they were invisible. Investigators eventually realized something chilling. Jackson Reed had not infiltrated the government from the outside, he had grown within it. The system had trusted him, promoted him, and given him authority, and he used that authority to build corridors that no one noticed until the body of Sophia Hayes forced questions. Now dozens of people were in custody. Trucks were impounded. Documents were scanned page by page. But every map on the wall contained areas that were still not fully understood. Several markers were circled in red with a single word beneath them: pending. The network had not collapsed. It had only been wounded. Someone else was still out there, still moving pieces, still watching from behind the curtain. The news of Reed's arrest spread quickly through Washington. At first, it was no more than a rumor whispered in hallways. Then it became a headline on every screen. A senior government official, a man trusted with naval secrets and national defense, had been taken into custody after a midnight chase at sea. The shock was immediate, for many inside government circles. It felt personal. Reed was not a distant figure. People had worked with him, saluted him, shared coffee with him, and spoken about national security in the same conference rooms. Now every memory of those conversations felt tainted. What alarmed officials most was not the drugs or the money. It was the scale of influence he had operated with. Positions of power are designed to resist corruption. But in this case, power had become the vehicle for crime. Reed's fingerprints were not just on documents or bank transfers, they were on decisions, assignments, and policies he had shaped. The movement of ships, the schedule of patrols, and the inspection of containers, every choice he made looked like leadership. In reality, many of those choices helped a criminal enterprise move more freely. As federal agencies dismantled the network, the consequences appeared in waves. Dozens of people were arrested, not just at ports but inside offices and agencies. Some were escorted from their desks in handcuffs while colleagues looked on in disbelief. Others turned themselves in, hoping cooperation would reduce their punishment. Departments that had never imagined themselves connected to organized crime suddenly found their own paperwork under review. Trust inside institutions weakened. Managers questioned whether loyalty had been misplaced. The shock traveled upward and outward. Public reaction was equally intense. For years, Reed had appeared as a symbol of strength, someone who represented military discipline and national honor. Now communities felt betrayed. The discovery that a respected official had secretly worked with dangerous criminals caused anger, confusion, and fear. Town hall meetings filled with frustrated residents who wanted explanations. Veterans who had once served under Reed wondered what else had been hidden. Families of missing people came forward with old suspicions, asking investigators to reopen cases. The scandal became more than a single crime. It became a question of how a man like this could rise so high without being stopped. Inside the command center, the work did not slow. Every seized document was scanned. Every phone was decrypted. Every shipping route was traced backward and forward. What investigators found was a system so complex and well organized that it could not have existed without years of quiet development. Some aspects were still unclear. Other pieces were painfully obvious. There were records of port delays that matched drug arrivals, customs forms that mirrored cartel transport schedules, and internal emails that made more sense when seen in context. The truth was that the network had been hiding in plain sight. It had operated in the shadows of routine work, using government structure to protect criminal activity. Yet even as officials worked through evidence, another realization emerged. Reed's capture had removed the visible leader. But the machinery had not stopped immediately. Certain routes went silent, others became harder to track, as if someone had started shutting doors before agents reached them. Several names on the investigative board were still circled, not crossed out. Those individuals had not been found. Some could be accomplices. Others could be victims of the system. The unanswered questions created a kind of tension that spread through the room. It was impossible to know how many people had acted willingly, how many had been misled, or how many had simply chosen not to ask questions. What could be seen clearly was the damage. Trust in internal structures had been shaken. Departments were forced to audit their own employees. Policies were rewritten. Access privileges were suspended. The idea that every worker wearing a badge was safe to rely on no longer felt certain. In the weeks following the arrest, reports came from smaller offices describing attempted data deletion, sudden resignations, and unreturned access cards. Some individuals disappeared quietly, leaving houses with lights still on and mail piling at the door. Reed sat behind bars awaiting charges. But the consequences of his actions would echo far beyond a courtroom. A criminal network had not simply used the government. It had grown inside it. And though one man had fallen, investigators knew that systems like this did not collapse overnight. The maps on the wall remained covered with pins and notes. Lines connecting ports and offices had been drawn over and over, but no one could erase them. Yet there were still unanswered threads. There were still red circles marked, pending. Reed had been the face of the operation. He had been caught, but there were shadows behind him. And every agent in the room understood what came next. The hardest work was not capturing a single man. The hardest work was rebuilding trust, repairing damage, and making sure no one like him ever stepped quietly into power again. The case of Jackson Reed did not fade when the handcuffs closed. It continued to echo through every corner of Washington for weeks. Investigators, journalists, and families asked the same question: how could this have happened? A respected leader trusted with the security of the nation had used his power to serve a secret life. The discovery of drugs, money, and a murdered young woman broke something larger than a criminal network. It broke public confidence. New policies were drafted. Internal audits were launched across military departments, customs offices, and port authorities. Government employees who had once walked freely now faced questioning, reviews, and strict oversight. In some offices, people whispered because the betrayal felt personal. They had served next to Reed. They had trusted him. Now every familiar face was suddenly uncertain. Among the public, the reaction was emotional. Veterans who had served under Reed expressed anger and disbelief. Families of missing women came forward, hoping their cases would finally be re-examined. Communities near the ports demanded more protection and transparency. Even those who had no direct connection felt the sting of betrayal. This was not a cartel boss hiding in the shadows. It was a man wearing a government